Have you ever seen a child sitting alone by the side of a garbage-strewn alley, carefully picking through fabric scraps like they were treasure? That afternoon, the sky was grey. Cold rain trickled down the cracked windows of the public housing complex. Lights were out again. Someone cursed in the hallway. Babies cried. But Lina, 13 years old, sat quietly beside her rusted bicycle, clutching a plastic bag filled with torn cloth. No one knew why she cared so much about fabric. No one noticed that every night she patched each piece by hand to make coats for the other kids in the shelter, those even colder than she was. Lina lived with her grandfather, once a skilled tailor, now blind and too frail to work. She became his hands, his eyes, and in many ways the life he never got to finish living. Each morning she folded a small jacket into her backpack and rode her bike to the edge of the city. Not to beg, not to steal, but to stand outside the rusting gates of a forgotten mansion. Once owned by Eleanor Hartwell, a fashion icon who vanished from the world 8 years ago. Some said she lost her memory in an accident. Others whispered she'd gone mad after her son died. Whatever the truth, no one dared approach. The gates were covered in ivy, the stone walls stained with age, cameras tilted suspiciously toward anyone who lingered too long. But Lina, she came every day at 5 p.m, never knocked, never spoke, just left behind a hand-sewn patch of fabric, and quietly walked away. On the 21st day, as Lina turned to leave, the gate creaked open. A sharp voice called out, "What is this, a stunt? Trying to get your 15 minutes of fame?" Lina froze. A tall, angular woman stood in the shadows, steel grey hair twisted into a tight bun, eyes like polished glass behind circular frames. Eleanor Hartwell. Lina swallowed hard, heart pounding in her ears. "I'm not here to ask for anything," she said. I don't believe you've truly lost your memory. I think you're hiding from it." Eleanor raised an eyebrow, then to Lina's surprise let out a bitter laugh. "A girl from the junkyard thinks she can read my mind. That's cute." Lina didn't flinch. She reached into her bag and pulled out a sketch, a dress design Eleanor had drawn years ago but never released. Eleanor's face changed. Only one person had ever seen that sketch, her son. In one swift motion, Eleanor snatched the paper, tore it in two and hissed, "Get off my property." The gates slammed shut. Lina didn't cry. She only lowered her head, not in defeat, but in understanding. Because she saw it now. Behind the fortress and the cameras wasn't a monster, just a heart too wounded to trust the world again. The next day, Lina returned. No sketches this time, only a small jacket stitched from old denim and bits of flannel. At the collar, she'd sewn in a faded piece of lavender lace, Eleanor's favourite colour. On that tiny patch of lace, hand-stitched in soft, uneven letters, were the words, "I'm not here to make you remember, I'm here to make you want to." Eleanor hadn't opened the front door in 2 years. She ordered groceries online. She paid her staff through automatic transfers. The only living soul allowed inside her house was a nurse who spoke less than 10 words a day, and still, on that quiet Tuesday morning, she stood at the end of her hallway holding a jacket stitched from rags and tracing her fingers across a single line of thread. "I'm here to make you want to remember." That sentence echoed louder than it had any right to. She placed the jacket on the old armchair across from the fireplace, but she didn't sit. Instead, Eleanor turned toward the hallway on the left. It led to a locked room, a room she hadn't entered since the accident. She reached into the drawer and pulled out a small brass key. Her hand trembled. Not from age, from fear. She turned the lock. The door creaked open. Dust danced in the light like forgotten memories. Inside, a studio frozen in time. Spools of thread still on the shelves. Sketches pinned to the wall, half-finished gowns hanging from mannequins like ghosts. And on the desk, an old leather-bound sketchbook wrapped in twine. Eleanor stared at it for a long time before sitting down. She untied the twine, opened the first page. Her own handwriting stared back at her. Full collection, in memory of Ben. Ben! Her son. She used to say his name out loud every morning. Now she could barely think it. He had loved her so deeply, admired her with childish devotion. She had loved him too, but she was always working, always too busy, always needing just one more meeting, one more call, one more runway, until that one call she never answered. And the next call was from the hospital. Ben had been hit by a car, running across town to bring her a gift on the day of her fashion show. He was 16. After the funeral, Eleanor never touched a needle again. She stopped speaking to the world, stopped speaking to herself. When the doctors called it trauma-induced dissociative amnesia, it felt like a blessing. For the first time, forgetting didn't hurt. But now, a girl with dirt under her fingernails and sunlight in her eyes had stitched a memory into her palm, and it burned. That night, Eleanor stood at her front window. She hadn't drawn the curtains in years. Down the street, under a flickering lamppost, she saw her, Lina, sitting on the curb, sewing something. Again, Eleanor almost turned away. But then, her eyes caught a glimmer, a piece of lavender lace tucked into the next collar, and suddenly her breath caught in her throat. That lace, it wasn't from donation bins. It was from a gown she had designed 20 years ago, a custom piece, only 2 copies in the world. One was burned in a fire backstage during Fashion Week. The other had been given to someone Eleanor never thought she'd see again. How did that girl get it? She stepped back from the window. The past had just cracked open, and Eleanor was no longer sure what or who was waiting behind it. Eleanor didn't sleep that night. She sat in the dark, the soft ticking of a grandfather clock, her only companion. That lace, that girl, that jacket. None of it made sense. She couldn't have known, Eleanor whispered. No one could have. That particular lace, delicate, hand-dyed lilac with a silver trim, had only ever been used once in her entire career. And the last time Eleanor saw it, it was wrapped around a baby. 20 years ago, a woman came to her studio. Young, trembling, eyes filled with questions no one had ever answered for her. She held out a bundle of fabric. "Please, can you make something beautiful out of this? It's the only thing I have left of my mother." Eleanor didn't usually take custom work, not for strangers, not for stories. But that day she did. She remembered staying up until dawn, turning those scraps into something whole again. A lavender gown, stitched with gentleness. She never asked what happened to the woman afterward. She never even got her name. Just a quiet thank you, and the memory of how fragile people can be when they hand you their pain. So how did Lina, a girl from the edge of the city, end up with that lace? Unless... No, that couldn't be. But Eleanor couldn't unsee it now. The next morning Lina returned. This time the gate was already open. She hesitated. Was this a mistake? She stepped in. The yard was wild with overgrowth, but the path to the front door had been swept clean. On the steps sat a tray. Tea, warm, 2 cups, a plate of scones, and next to it, a folded note. Lina opened it slowly. "Come back tomorrow, bring the sketch." The sketch? She blinked. Did Eleanor mean the torn design Lina had tried to show her earlier? No, that one was destroyed. This must be something else. But which sketch? Lina had drawn dozens, some from memory, some from old magazines, some were hers entirely. Then she remembered. There was one she never showed anyone, one she'd found in a leather-bound book, tucked behind a broken wall tile in the shelter where she and her grandfather once stayed. A sketch with the initials EH scribbled in the corner. A gown that had never made it to the runway. A design, with lavender lace sewn into the neckline. Lina clutched the note in her hand. Her heart was pounding. How could she possibly know I had that sketch? Was this a test, a trap, or something else? She didn't know it yet, but what Eleanor was really asking was far more than a drawing. She was asking for the truth. A truth Lina wasn't even sure she was ready to face. The next day, Lina stood at the mansion gates, holding the sketch in both hands, carefully pressed between 2 pieces of cardboard so it wouldn't bend in the wind. She had barely slept. Her fingers trembled, not from the cold, but from the weight of not knowing. Why did Eleanor want it, and what would she do with it? The gates creaked open again, but this time Eleanor was waiting. No glasses, no sharpness, just a woman in a thick wool sweater, her hair down, silver streaks soft around her face. For a moment neither of them spoke. Eleanor looked smaller somehow, like a statue that had finally been allowed to crack. She gestured toward the porch. "Sit," she said quietly. Lina obeyed. They sat across from each other. The tea was still warm. A second plate of scones had been added. "You brought it?" Eleanor asked, eyes never leaving hers. Lina nodded, slowly pulling the sketch out. She laid it on the table. Eleanor didn't reach for it, not yet. She stared at it like it was a photograph of a memory she didn't want to lose again. Finally she spoke. "Where did you find this?" Lina hesitated. "Behind a wall, at the Southbridge shelter. It was hidden behind a broken tile. No one knew it was there." Eleanor's breath caught. Southbridge. That name hadn't passed her lips in decades. Who took you to that shelter?" she asked, voice barely above a whisper. Lina blinked. "My grandfather. After the accident, he said it was the only place left that felt safe." Eleanor looked away. "And before that, your parents?" Lina shook her head. "I don't know, I never knew them." Silence, so thick it felt like the wind itself had stopped moving. Then Eleanor did something she hadn't done in years. She reached across the table and gently touched Lina's wrist. Her hand was cool, delicate, but her grip was trembling. "Lina," she said slowly, "I need to ask you something, and I want you to answer me honestly." Lina met her eyes. "Have you ever seen this woman?" Eleanor pulled a small photograph from her coat pocket. It was faded, old. A young woman, barely 20, holding a baby wrapped in a lavender cloth. Lina's breath caught. She had never seen the photo before. But the face, it was her own, not as she was now, but as a baby, cradled in the arms of someone she had no memory of, yet somehow felt she had known her entire life. Her voice cracked. "Who is she?" Eleanor didn't answer. Not yet. Because in that moment she wasn't sure if she had the right to tell her. But she knew this girl wasn't just here by chance. She wasn't just talented, or brave, or kind. She was here for a reason. A reason buried 2 decades ago behind broken tiles and broken hearts. The rain had just stopped that evening, 20 years ago. The kind of drizzle that left the streets smelling like metal and ash. Eleanor remembered the exact scent, because it was the same night she almost said no. She had just finished a client fitting. It was late. Her heels clicked against the marble of her showroom floor. That's when the knock came. Not at the main entrance, but at the side door, tucked between loading docks and forgotten deliveries. When she opened it, there was a girl, barely 20, soaked, shivering. She held something in her arms, a baby, wrapped in a too thin blanket. And in her eyes, not fear, but desperation dressed as silence. "Please," the girl whispered, "just 5 minutes. I don't want money. I need someone to see me." Eleanor didn't know what made her step aside. She wasn't known for kindness. But that night, something in the girl's voice bent her spine. Inside, the girl barely spoke, only clutched the baby close and pulled from her coat a tangle of cloth. Lavender, hand-stitched, worn thin from time. "It was my mother's," she said softly. "It's all I have left of her." Then she looked up, eyes glistening. "Can you turn it into something beautiful, something I can pass down?" Eleanor was silent for a long time. Then she nodded and stayed up until the sun rose. She never asked the girl's name, never asked where she was from. Only that the baby was healthy, that she was safe. When the gown was finished, the girl cried, "No one's ever made something like this for someone like me." Eleanor gave her a coat, some food, a cab voucher, and watched her disappear into the early morning fog. She never saw her again. Until now, until Lina. Back in the present, Eleanor stared at the photo in her hand. Her fingers trembled. Lina sat across from her, waiting, confused, hopeful, afraid. Eleanor wanted to say it. "That girl was your mother." She wanted to say more. How she tried to find her later. How she called hospitals, shelters, left notes no one answered. But she didn't. Not yet. Because some truths need air to settle. Like dust in a quiet room before it becomes visible. So instead she said this. "I once knew a woman who carried pain the way most people carry handbags. Close to the chest and heavy with things they never told anyone. She reminded me of you." Lina looked down, her voice soft. "I don't know anything about her, not even her name." Eleanor nodded. "You will?" But before she could say more, a voice called out from the sidewalk. "Lina, you in there?" It was her grandfather. Panicked, out of breath. Eleanor stood up, Lina rushed to the gate. And in that moment, everything paused. Like a breath held underwater, right before the truth could break the surface. The moment Lina opened the gate, her grandfather was already halfway up the path. Rain clung to his coat, his breathing shallow, his voice tight with worry. "Are you okay? Why weren't you home?" Lina ran to him. "I'm fine, Grandpa. I just stayed a little longer." He glanced behind her, saw the mansion, and then he saw her, Eleanor, standing on the porch. For a moment, everything around them went quiet. Even the wind seemed to pause, as if waiting. The old man's brows furrowed, his eyes, clouded with age, tried to focus. Eleanor stepped forward slowly. There was something fragile in her voice now, almost childlike. "Your name, it wouldn't be Benjamin, would it?" He blinked. "It used to be, a long time ago." Eleanor's hand shot to her mouth. A gasp, sharp, involuntary, escaped her lips. "You used to work at Area Street Tailors, 1984, back room, left-handed stitching." The man stared. Then he laughed, softly, disbelieving. "Nobody remembers that, nobody but you." Lina looked between them, confused. "You know each other?" Eleanor smiled, a sad, small smile. "He used to help press my fabrics. He never spoke unless spoken to. But his work, flawless. The old man chuckled. And you? The Ice Queen with a sketchbook full of fury. Lina blinked. Wait, what? He turned to her gently. When your mum left you at the shelter, she left behind a sketch. A single design, tucked into a copy of Little Women. She told me if she ever grows up and wants to know who I was, give her this. He swallowed hard, his hand trembled slightly. But I couldn't. I didn't want you chasing ghosts. Eleanor stepped closer, her voice softer now. That design, it wasn't just your mother's, it was ours. She inspired it, I crafted it, and now you've brought it back to life. The silence that followed wasn't empty. It was full of everything unsaid, full of stories too painful to tell and too precious to forget. Then the old man asked cautiously, Did you ever find her? Eleanor's face fell. No, I tried, for years. But she disappeared, and by the time I found the shelter again, she was already gone. All that remained was a sketch, and a child she never stopped loving. Lina didn't speak, not yet. She was staring at the two of them. The way their voices softened, the way their faces shifted, recognition, regret, something that looked like peace. A question was forming in her chest, but it wasn't ready to leave her lips. Not yet. Eleanor looked at Lina. Her voice trembled as she asked, Do you still want to know her name? Lina's eyes welled. Only if you're ready to tell me. Eleanor nodded, stepped back, and said a name that hadn't been spoken in 20 years. Eleanor took a breath so deep, so hesitant, as if saying this name out loud might change something inside her. And maybe it would. She looked at Lina, not as a stranger, not as a child, but as someone who had unknowingly carried a piece of her past back home. Her name, Eleanor said softly, was Mira. The name hung in the air like smoke, delicate, faint, and yet it wrapped itself around everything. Lina repeated it once like a whisper. Mira. It didn't spark any memories, not really, but it felt right. Like hearing the name of a song you've never known, but your soul remembers. Eleanor turned and walked inside. She returned with a small wooden box, worn but carefully preserved. She left this with me, said she'd come back for it someday. She opened the lid. Inside a letter, still sealed, yellowed at the edges but untouched by time. And on the front, written in a rushed but graceful hand, For Lina when she's ready. Lina stared at it. Her hands didn't move, not yet. You never opened it? Eleanor shook her head. It wasn't mine to open, it was a promise. The old man sat down slowly beside her, his eyes misted, his voice rough. She used to hum your name in her sleep, you know. After she left the shelter, Mira would whisper Lina like a prayer she wasn't sure she deserved to say. Lina finally reached out and took the letter. She didn't open it. Instead, she held it against her chest, pressed it into the space right above her heart. Because in that moment, she didn't need to read it to know. She already felt it. Her mother may have vanished, but her love never did. Eleanor turned toward the window. The late afternoon sun had begun to pour through the ivy-covered glass, casting golden shadows across the sketch still lying on the table. She wanted you to be more than what the world tried to shrink her into, she whispered. And you are. You already are. But before the stillness could settle completely, Lina finally spoke. Her voice was soft, softer than Eleanor had ever heard. Why did she leave me? The question broke through the quiet like a hairline crack in stained glass. Neither Eleanor nor her grandfather answered right away, because the answer wasn't simple. It never is when it comes to love and letting go. Eleanor finally sat beside her. She didn't speak, just rested a hand on Lina's shoulder and said, I can tell you what I know, but the rest, the part only she can answer, is in that letter. Lina waited until the sky turned the colour of quiet, that hour when birds stop singing and the world feels like it's holding its breath. She sat on the porch alone. Eleanor and her grandfather had gone inside, giving her space. The wooden box lay open beside her. The letter rested in her hands, still sealed, still whole, still full of questions it might never fully answer. She ran her fingers over her name. Lina. Written not just in ink, but in urgency, in love, in fear. She peeled back the seal with slow, deliberate care, like touching something sacred, unfolded the page, and read. My Lina, if you are reading this, then somehow the world was kind enough to bring you here, and for that I'm already crying. I never wanted to leave you. That sentence hurts to write, because I know how easy it is to say, and how hard it must be for you to believe. But I didn't leave because I didn't love you. I left because I loved you so much. I couldn't bear the thought of you being raised in the version of me I had become. I was drowning, Lina, in grief, in silence, in mistakes I couldn't undo. Your father had left. My family had shut their doors. and I was working 3 jobs, sleeping in bus stations. But the thing that broke me, the moment I knew I might ruin you, was the day I looked at you and realised I was becoming numb. I didn't want you to be raised by a ghost." Lina paused. The words blurred, not because of time, but because of the tears. She wiped them away and kept reading. "So I did the hardest thing I've ever done. I gave you to someone who would never forget your name. Someone who would feed you warm meals and hold your hand even when you pushed them away. Benjamin was kind. I knew he would love you, even if I couldn't stay. And I left behind this letter in case one day the world found a way to give you back to me." Lina's hands trembled. Her chest ached with something that wasn't just grief, but recognition. This pain, this absence, it had a name now, and it had always been love, in disguise. The last lines read, "I hope you never think I vanished because you weren't enough. You were always more than enough. I just wasn't ready to be the mother you deserved. But if there's still a thread of me inside you, if you ever pick up a needle or a sketch pad, then know. That part of me never left, it grew with you. Love you always. Mira." Lina folded the letter gently, pressed it against her heart, and for the first time in 13 years, she let herself cry. Not the kind of crying that begs for someone to fix it, but the kind that says, "I understand now." From the window, Eleanor watched, her hand on the glass, her own eyes filled with a quiet, aching pride. And beside her, the old man whispered, "She's not just remembering, she's healing." For 2 days after reading the letter, Lina didn't speak much. She wasn't sad, not exactly. She was quiet in the way people are when they're remembering something they never knew they'd forgotten. She carried the letter folded in her pocket, touched it sometimes like a pulse check, just to make sure it was still real. Eleanor gave her space. She didn't ask questions, didn't offer advice, didn't try to fill the silence. She simply did what few adults ever truly learn to do. She sat with her. Not beside her, but with her, in stillness, in warmth, in presence. And sometimes that was enough. It was on the 3rd morning that Lina finally spoke. She stood in the middle of Eleanor's old studio, sunlight flooding in through the ivy-streaked glass, and said, "I want to learn." Eleanor turned. "Learn what?" Lina looked down at the dusty sewing machine, at the spools of forgotten thread, at the wall of half-finished dreams. "Everything, whatever she knew, whatever you know." Eleanor smiled. Not the kind that stretches across the face, but the kind that settles quietly in the chest. She stepped over to the table, picked up a swatch of fabric, soft grey linen, held it out. "Then start with this, make something simple, something small. Not because it will be perfect, but because it will be yours." And so they began. 1 stitch, 1 cut, 1 story at a time. The first day, Lina pricked her finger twice. The second day, she got the tension wrong. By the 3rd day, the seams started to align. But more than fabric, they were rebuilding trust. In self, in each other, in the idea that something lost could still become something beautiful. One afternoon, Eleanor brought out a large box, tucked beneath a dusty sheet. "These," she said, "were the last designs your mother inspired, before she left." Inside were 10 sketches. Some unfinished, some vivid, some with tear stains still visible. Lina touched each one like it was a piece of music, a note left behind. "Why did you keep them?" Eleanor looked at her for a long moment. "Because I wasn't ready to forget her, and I didn't know how to remember without breaking." That night, Lina stayed late in the studio. She redrew one of the designs, added her own touch, a new sleeve, a different hemline. She signed it with 2 letters in the bottom corner. LM Lina Mira. For the first time, she wasn't just borrowing her mother's story, she was continuing it. But just as the world began to feel steady again, a knock came at the mansion gate. Hard, loud, not curious, official. Lina froze. Eleanor stood up slowly. "Stay here," she said gently. "I'll check." Lina watched from the studio window as a man in a suit handed Eleanor a sealed envelope. She didn't open it right away. She stood still, stone still, and then, without a word, she looked back toward the house, her face pale, eyes wide. And Lina knew something was coming. The envelope sat unopened on the dining table. The air in the room was different now, thicker, still, like the moment just before a storm touches ground. Eleanor hadn't said a word since the man left. Lina watched her from the studio doorway, her hands still stained with chalk and thread. "What is it?" she finally asked. Eleanor didn't look up. She reached for a knife from the drawer, slit the envelope with slow, precise movements, unfolded the pages inside, and read. For a long time there was only the sound of the clock ticking, and the wind scraping gently at the ivy-covered windows. Then Eleanor sank into a chair, and whispered almost to herself, "It's a petition for property seizure. Someone's contesting the deed to this house." Lina stepped closer. "Who?" Eleanor slid the paper across the table. Lina read the name. Simon Calloway. Her heart dropped. Your old assistant? Eleanor nodded. Apparently he's claiming ownership of my estate, says I'm mentally unfit to manage it. Lina sat down across from her, eyes wide with disbelief. That's not true. You're better than ever. You've healed so much. Eleanor gave a sad, wry smile. Healing doesn't protect you from what people think you are, especially when they want what you have. The studio, the house, the sketches, the work they'd just begun, all of it suddenly felt like it could disappear again. Lina clenched her fists. We can fight this. We can get a lawyer. We can... Eleanor reached across the table and touched her hand. Lina, if this goes to court, everything will be public. Your name, your past, your mother's letter, her story. She paused. Are you ready for the world to know all of that? Lina didn't answer right away. She looked around the room, at the jacket she had sewn hanging on the coat rack, at the unfinished sketch still waiting on the easel, at the sewing machine, quiet now, but still warm from her touch. And then she looked at Eleanor, the woman who was once a stranger, now a mirror of what family could be. She took a deep breath. I don't know if I'm ready. She stood up. But I do know this place isn't just yours anymore. It's ours and no one gets to steal it again. That night they stayed up late. Eleanor dug out old receipts, signed contracts, hidden journals. Lina scanned and filed every page. They weren't fighting for bricks and wood. They were fighting for memory, for legacy, for all the lives that had gone unseen too long. The hearing was set for 3 weeks later, but something unexpected happened before then. A news story broke. Someone leaked the petition to a local blog. And within days, dozens of former students, employees, even strangers who once wore Eleanor's designs, began posting their stories about how she had shaped them, helped them, changed them. And in the centre of it all, a photo went viral. A teenage girl sewing in a sunlit studio with a caption, Legacy Stitched by Love. The petition was dropped quietly 2 days later. Simon vanished. The house was never mentioned again in legal documents. But for Lina, something bigger had been saved. Not just a home, but a story, a name, a beginning. Months passed. Lina's first full collection debuted at a small local show. She called it Mirror. 10 dresses, each one inspired by a memory she never had, and a mother she finally understood. At the end of the show, as the applause faded, Eleanor stood beside her and whispered, You didn't just remember her. You rewrote her ending. And somewhere in the silence that followed, Lina smiled. Not because everything was perfect, but because now she knew how to hold what mattered and let go of what didn't. Some stories aren't passed down in books. They're sewn quietly into fabric, into hands, into daughters, who learn to stitch the world back together, one thread at a time. Sometimes the people we lose never truly leave us. They live on in the stories we carry, in the letters we dare to open, in the hands we hold when words are no longer enough. Lina didn't just find her mother's name, she found the courage to write her own. And in doing so, she reminded us all, healing doesn't always mean forgetting. Sometimes it simply means remembering with gentler hands. So if you're holding on to something, a name, a memory, a quiet ache no one sees, may this story be your sign. You are not alone, and you are not forgotten. Out of the thousands of videos you could have chosen today, you chose this one. You gave your time, your heart, your presence, and for that, from the bottom of mine, thank you.